And I'm very excited to introduce you all to this year's alum, Alisa Fliss. And I will give you a little background on Alisa before she tells us a little bit about her recovery story. So, Alisa Fliss, EDS MBA, is an alum of the Renfrew Center of Coconut Creek. Through her personal experience struggling with her own eating disorder for 17 years and her time in treatment, Alisa recognized the media's over sensationalism of people's struggles rather than documenting the triumphant work it took of those who overcame struggles and great hardship. This led her on a journey to raise awareness and educate the public on the recovery process versus the disease state. She is passionate about recovery and has presented nationally at universities, school districts, conferences, and community events on such topics as eating disorder awareness, prevention, and recovery, and has appeared on Oprah, Good Morning America, CNN, and was featured in the Emmy-nominated HBO documentary Thin. Her primary interest is in parenting and being able to demonstrate that despite the struggles and obstacles that impact the entire family dynamic, when we practice what we preach and model integrity, we can instill resilience in our children and raise them to reach their fullest potential. Alisa holds a BS in education and English, an MBA in global management, and an EDS in educational leadership and administration. Alisa began her career in the United States Air Force as a security police officer. Since then, she has taught high school English, worked in pharmaceutical sales, returned to education where she was a middle school dean, and then an instructional leader for Palm Beach County Schools. Alisa has been with the same behavioral health care company for 12 years, where she specializes in treatment placement. Along the way, she held key leadership positions, including Director of Business Development, National Director of Training and Development, Associate Vice President of Business Relations, contributing significantly to team development, regional expansion, and company infrastructure. Just prior to her current role, Alisa served as CEO of Carolina House, and residential PHP and IOP for those struggling with eating disorders. Alisa also has two adult children, two Maltese named Molly and Lily, and is obsessed with renovating her home in Delray Beach, where she resides with her partner. We are so happy to have Alisa here with us today. Thank you so much, Alisa, for joining us.
No, thank you for having me. First of all, I wanted to say when I was watching the video and I was seeing the testimonials, I almost started crying, and I was like, no, you can't cry because I um I hate wearing makeup these days. But I did put on makeup this morning, and I was like, no, you can't have the eyeliner or the mascara like running. So thank you so much for having me, Erin.
Of
It's a
course.
pleasure. It's been a long time, many years, well over a decade since I've presented for Renfrew.
I know, and we're so happy to have you back, especially during our 40th year. Can you tell us a little bit kind of about, your history with the eating disorder and kind of how it developed and what you felt like kind of contributed to the development of it?
Sure. I think there are multiple things. So I will say that my parents divorced. Yeah, it was a pretty turbulent marriage. I have a brother and a half sister, and actually many step siblings. But my parents divorced when I was 3, and I remember every video, even at Renfrew, how did that affect you? And I'm like, well, I was too young to understand. But through all the work that I've done, I realized how it has impacted my life and how I was parentified at such a young age, and really feeling like I had to take care of my mother and take care of all of the people in my life because it was all like kind of crumbling around me. The other thing was, and this was actually mentioned in the documentary. I had a pediatrician. My mom had taken me to the pediatrician. I think I was like only like 7, 8 years old, something like that. And I only went for an ear infection, but the doctor just kind of looked me up and down. I remember him looking at me and he's like, what are you going to do about your daughter's weight? And my mom was like, well, what's wrong with my daughter's weight? And he said, she's fat. So he said, we have a great dietitian on staff. Immediately, they started sending me weekly. They put me on like a 1,000 calorie diet at the age of like 7. And I got all of this positive reinforcement. Every week I'd come back, they'd weigh me, they'd give me a sticker if I lost weight. And if I didn't lose weight, I didn't get a sticker. So it was very shaming. And then we just, even back in the early 80s, we lived in a culture where, thin was what was popular. And I was always a very shy and very introverted child and sort of struggled with that. I'm also Jewish, and there's such a high prevalence of eating disorders within the Jewish community. And I know a lot of that comes from generational trauma as well as many other things. But I always remember growing up, I mean, I kind of joke about this. It's funny, but it's not funny at the same time. How, in the Jewish religion, how do we repent for our sins? Is by fasting, and then how do we and then we break every fast and we celebrate by kind of like engorging ourselves. So I think between that, just all of these different influences. And I remember growing up, and as I was growing up, my siblings were thin at the time. I don't come from like a naturally like thin family. And I remember even family members saying, like, Alisa has so much potential. And even other people saying, like, Alisa has so much potential. She would be gorgeous, if she ever loses weight. And this is a young child. If she ever loses weight, she's going to be stunning. And there was nobody to ever tell me, and I don't blame anybody for that because I didn't know back then, but there was never anybody to tell me that who you are is good enough and that you are beautiful as you are. And so that's where all of the dieting and the behaviors sort of started.
Yeah, it's always strikes me that it usually starts from things that feel very innocuous in the moment. I mean, not the pediatrician. I would like to have some words
Yeah.
with the pediatrician and
I didn't remember his name, and I was like 6 years old. But
but like that idea that like it's these things that just kind of happen that we think, oh no, that didn't impact me. And then as they build and kind of almost like collect together, the impact really becomes so much more noticeable.
right.
What kind of, after having all of those experiences, Alisa, what kind of motivated you to seek treatment?
So, I when I was in the Air Force, and I actually enlisted right out of high school. I was like college bound and decided I wanted to go to the Air Force Academy, and then I got this brilliant idea that I could. It was too late in the year to apply, and it's like, well, maybe I could. But I think part of that was kind of feeding the eating disorder. It was like, I enjoyed the military, and I succeeded. While I was in the military, but there was also this feeling like if I could live a vigorous, like
Mm.
a rigorous lifestyle, I would be forced to exercise every day. And so I was in the Air Force, and then right after I had just reenlisted, I had my first intervention because that was when the eating disorder had actually gotten out of control for the first time and probably met like the true diagnostic criteria according to the DSM. And I was hospitalized in a German hospital at the time. I had just gotten a job, a very prestigious job that I was promoted to, where I would have been staying in Europe. And at the time, I had to come back to the United States for treatment. And at that point, I decided I wanted to finish my college degree, and I went ahead with the medical board, and I did get out. So I have an honorable discharge, but there's this tiny little code. If you looked it up in a big book, it says ineligible to reenlist for medical reasons. And I really just didn't know how to treat eating disorders at the time. So I did get married very, very young. I was in the military. I got married when I was 18. I had my son when I was 19. But I was bound and determined again to show people that I had that potential, that I was not a screw up, that I was, we could always trade like one disorder for another. And so I was raising my son. I was going to a 4-year university full time, and I was working full time, like as a nursing assistant. And And again, the eating disorder was creeping up. And at right around that point, I knew that I had to do this for my son. If I couldn't do it for me, like I had to do it for my child. And I have always felt that way. So at that point, I there was only one program in the entire country, and the internet was still very, very new at that point. You couldn't Google, nobody had a website, and well, people had websites, but you couldn't just you couldn't find anything on eating disorder
Yeah.
programs. So the one commercial for one program that was in California, I called the 800 number. I went out there. The program didn't really resonate with me. However, I'm going to always give it everything that I have. Insurance ran out very quickly. I feel like after like 2, 3 weeks, and I went home. So um, I went home, but I gave it a go, and I was not symptomatic, but again, a chronic dieter, chronic exerciser, and it was getting in the way of my life. Um, I did graduate college in 3 years, moved back to Florida. I was living in Ohio at the time, moved back to Florida to teach and was very outspoken on recovery. But again, it was sort of like this pseudo recovery where I was still striving to be the best teacher. I was like an award-winning teacher and I was getting promoted. And then I had like gotten my MBA while I was working full time and raising my son. And I still got that in like a little less than like 2 years. And I will say that there's a lot of childhood trauma there as well that we kind of like pushed on the back burner. You know, in my family, we just don't talk about things. And my marriage was, I was married to somebody who really struggled with a lot of mental health issues, and it was a very volatile relationship. And when I went into pharmaceutical sales, I was pushing and I was pushing and I was pushing. And that really, then that became like my new eating disorder
Mhm.
until it was really the eating disorder and it kind of got
Yeah.
worse than it ever was. And I was going through a horrible divorce at the time. And I was like, I have to do this for my, I have to do this. At that point, I already had a second child and I have to do this for my children because every weekend that, or every other weekend, like when they were at their father's or any other time that he had them during the week, here I was, like I was in the hospital for an electrolyte imbalance and dehydration, and it was just completely out of control. And I knew my life was at risk. So at that point, I sought treatment at Renfrew.
Yeah. And it's you highlight this piece of, how easy it is to kind of switch and kind of slide the
Yeah.
behaviors with like the root still being there. And that
Yes.
it's like so important to really get at like, okay, well, what's underneath, what's really contributing to kind of these these avoidances still coming up because I'm just finding different ways to do it. I'm going to fulfill that potential. It's just now going to be in work or in this way or in that
It
way.
is avoidance. It is avoidance because it's trading one distraction for the other. The eating disorder was very much a distraction from life. It gave me something to think about 24 hours a day. And I mean 24 hours a day. You
Yeah.
know, it got to the point where I was like barely even sleeping. And then you trade that for what else is going to make me feel worthy.
Mhm. Yep.
So
Yeah. Kind of thinking about avoidance and you and I talked prior to this about being part of the documentary means you can't avoid that part of your
mhm.
life and that part of your history. What kind of were the motivators or what were the pieces that had you say like, okay, yeah, I'm going to be a part of this, I'm going to kind of take this step and kind of take away the chance for myself to avoid this in the future?
So truth be told,
Mhm.
when I called Renfrew, they did let me know that they were filming a documentary and that they found my story very interesting because I was a parent and they had very few parents, and yet I was also very successful and I was also a good parent, and they wanted to tell my story, and I did say no a couple of times. Um, and I always say if I wasn't so codependent at that point in my life, I probably would have stuck firm to that. But I remember them saying, but it could help so many people. And I thought, this is going to be like what if this ever even comes to fruition, which it probably won't. It's going to be this small rinky-dink documentary that I'll never see again. So I'm like, if it could help anybody, I'm
Mhm.
willing to do that. And so that was then I wound up becoming one of the four main subjects
Mhm.
of the documentary at that time. And it's interesting because listen, you can take like 253 hours, 400 hours of footage and you have to create a story. And HBO has their story that they want to, and Renfrew has, their mission. And somewhere along the lines, I think that there was there was a huge disconnect. Um, I will forever credit Renfrew for saving my life and the work that I did there. But I think that it's always held me accountable. I think that now what you see in the documentary, because I wound up going back to Renfrew, was
Mhm.
I was again the perfect patient. It was like I was going to do whatever I had to, but in doing so, I wasn't really feeling my feelings. So we talk a lot about, like, I remember even when I was the CEO of an eating disorder program, and it was like they think that eating disorder patients are the most delicate patients on the planet. And it's like, don't trigger, don't say this, don't say that. When in reality, the only way that I could really recover is to be triggered over and over and over again. Because I say, our issues are our fires. And how could you really put out a fire if there is no fire? But what I have found is we all have the luxury in life of when we meet people of picking and choosing what we want to tell them about our story. And I don't even mean our recovery story. I even mean like just anything. And we get to tweak
Mhm.
that. And we have the luxury of like never even telling people that, or most people have the luxury of never even mentioning that they're in recovery from something, or they went through treatment, or that they spend time in a psych hospital. But I know that anybody can Google me at any given time and they will find all of this information. So I do think that participating in the documentary has held me truly accountable, because I feel like in some ways um, I am in some ways kind of like the face of recovery for that documentary. And I don't want to be hypocritical. So it's really held me accountable. And what you see is what you get. And I don't introduce myself as somebody who has an eating disorder, but if somebody asks, I'm willing to speak openly and
Yeah.
honestly about that and about my struggles.
Well, and I think that vulnerability, like, to share is so important because it is that idea of, like, feeling the feelings and feeling the feelings around, "This was a part of my life," and, like,
Yeah,
"This was a part of my story," and, I don't need to open up with, like, "Hi, I'm Elisa, and I was," like
right, right.
and, like, I also don't need to censor that, and, like, the fact that people can find that out, that's okay, I can then talk about it. What has recovery kind of looked like for you since your time in treatment and since your time with them?
So I want to go back to when I first got out of treatment. I was hanging out with somebody who was in treatment with me and was still very disordered, which I know you're not supposed to do. And I was doing very, very well in my recovery. And she's like, she's like, well, what does recovery feel like? And in the past, I always thought that feelings were thoughts, and I had that disconnect. But the second time around, I definitely knew, I had to be broken before I could be rebuilt. And I told her, I said, listen, recovery is horrible. It's like terrible. It's grueling. It's anxiety provoking, it's depressing, it is every single day is so hard. And she's like, well, you're not making this very appealing for me. Like, why would I want to do this? I said, because of all of the anxiety, the depression, the anguish, the fear, the everything that I feel, the pit in my stomach day in and day out is still so much better than the nothing that I felt for most of my life. And if I could get through every single day, if I could get through this day with feeling these horrible feelings and not acting on my eating disorder, at the end of the day, I felt like untouchable. I was like, I looked forward to the next day. It was like, it just got easier and easier. And I always said I had to do the opposite. I truly had to do the opposite. We just naturally, as human beings and as women, we go into our closet and the first thing we grab is like something. And I would grab an outfit to wear that day. And I'm like, you know what? I'm like, oh gosh, I think this is gonna, no, I don't look good in this. And I put it back and then I would take it out. And I'm like, no, guess what outfit you're wearing today? And
Yep.
look, and so since then, early on, I was very outspoken. I was asked to do a lot of speaking. I enjoy speaking. I wish I would have like stuck with it, and I'd almost like to get back into it. But I think in the beginning, I was going to therapy a lot. I was seeing a dietitian, and I really made recovery like my full-time job for a period of time. And I think that what it's looked like is unfortunately, we are still women in a society that believes that thin is the ideal for some reason. And I'm loving seeing that that is shifting. And I do really see that shifting. Um, I do remember people asking me to do, and this is why I stopped doing interviews at some point, and it was because everybody only wanted to hear the what I call the gory story. Even the director for Finn had called me and said, People Magazine wants to do an interview. And I said, I'm not going to talk about that. And they're like, but you have to understand, Lisa, that's what sells. And I said, no, I said, you are so influential. I mean, they're in Hollywood. Like these young girls they're going to buy whatever it is you sell them and whoever it is you choose to put on the front of that magazine. And until somebody wants to talk about recovery and really wants to hear about recovery, I'm not going to talk about that story and my symptoms because it's so competitive. And it becomes like a team. You're in treatment, and it's like the popular team is you want to be the most disordered, you want to be the thinnest, you want to be and the unpopular team. All of a sudden, you start to feel unpopular as you start to recover. And I remember when I knew that I was truly ready to leave, that I was like, no, who's joining my team? I always felt like now I'm dating myself, like Jerry Maguire. Anybody who saw Jerry Maguire with like the
Yep.
fish, and it was like, who's coming with me? Like, I
Yep.
need people on my team, like let's build this team. But recovery, I don't struggle with the eating disorder anymore, but I struggle with life. I struggle with anxiety. I struggle with still imposter syndrome and putting people before me. And actually, a couple years ago, I started for the first time in my life really doing trauma work and EMDR. And that really takes you back to your childhood, and it's really helped me to have more compassion for that child who I've been so hard on for so long. But it's also allowed me to love fully. I think there was a part in the documentary where I'm crying and I'm saying, I think that the only two people that I've been able to truly love are my children. And I don't know how to like truly love. And I've been with the same um, woman for the last 20 years, and or October will be like 20 years. And I'm able to love fully. And my children are, they were 2 and 10 in the documentary, and they are 31 and 23 right now, and very successful. My son has his master's. He lives in Colorado. He's a news producer, and my daughter is getting her PsyD in clinical psychology and wants to specialize in trauma and eating disorders. So, recovery can be so, so beautiful. And I always ask people, when you look at me, like, what do you see? And people say, like, oh, you're funny, you're smart, you're this, you're that. And I don't do it for ego. It's like when I'm talking to a person who's struggling, and I'm like, so if I'm all of these things and I'm the face of recovery or a face of recovery, what are you so afraid of?
Mhm.
You could have this too.
Yeah, and I love how real you are about how hard recovery is in the sense that like it does require you to feel. And
Yeah.
like that can be so scary. And that's what makes it so rewarding
And
because,
empowering too.
yeah, because to be able to feel means that we feel fully and means we're able to love, means we're able to connect, we're able to really feel close to people, we're able to bring other people onto our team and be like, come on, everybody get their goldfish, we're going. Like,
Yeah. Right.
like we're able to do that. And I feel like, you know, I always say my favorite role with Renfrew has been the alumni services coordinator because it is that idea of that team of recovery, that
Yeah.
like this is just as important as the treatment point because this is the thing that's going to continue on as you keep going through life. And I feel like that is just so important. And I'm so glad you were able to speak to that today.
Oh, thank you.
So I'm realizing we are at time. I feel like I could talk to you for
Okay.
another 30 minutes, but we don't want to take time from the other workshops. So I want to thank you, Alisa, so much for being here and for speaking with us today. And I want to thank all of our attendees for joining us and being a part and listening today. You will now have, I believe it is 10 minutes to get to, 15 minutes to get to your next workshop. The next workshop will start promptly at 11:15. You are welcome to join early. And as I said, if you have any questions or concerns, um, you can email us at alumni@renfrewcenter.com. So thank you all again, and we'll
And
see
I
you
just
at
want
the
to
next
thank
workshop.
everybody as well for listening.
Go
So,
ahead, Lisa.
no, I just want to thank everybody. Thank you, Erin, for having me on, and thank you everybody for listening. So, and best of luck in all of your recoveries.
Thank you,
All right,
everyone.
I'm signing off.